Lyra Velen had lived among humans for 3 years, and in all that time, she had never once been afraid of her husband. She came from the Valorian Conclave, a civilization spread across 11 star systems, built on the philosophy of calm reason and precise emotional control. Her people did not raise their voices. They did not clench their fists. Conflict was resolved through long deliberation, measured words, and the slow rotation of council chambers filled with soft blue light. War was something that happened in old histories, a shameful chapter they had long since closed. Marcus Webb was nothing like that. He laughed too loudly at things that were not particularly funny. He cried at old films without shame. He cooked elaborate meals late at night when he could not sleep, leaving the kitchen smelling of garlic and something warm that Lyra had no word for in her language. He held her hand in public, which Valorian custom considered unnecessarily intimate, and he did not seem to care even slightly what anyone thought about it. She had married him because she was curious. She stayed because somewhere between his terrible jokes and his careful way of listening, she had stopped being curious and started being home. The Valorian diplomatic mission to Earth had been her assignment, not her choice. She was a junior cultural attaché, sent to observe and report. Humans were the newest species to join the interstellar cooperative, and many in the conclave found them puzzling. Too emotional, too unpredictable, too quick to feel things that should have been processed and set aside. Lyra had agreed with that assessment, at first. Then she met Marcus at a gathering held in the mission hall, where he had come as a translator for the Earth delegation. He spoke 3 languages, could read body language across species with unsettling accuracy, and had brought homemade bread to a diplomatic function because, as he explained to her, people always talked more honestly when they were eating something good. She had found that observation ridiculous. She had also eaten 3 pieces of the bread. Their courtship, if it could be called that, was a slow and slightly chaotic thing. He asked questions about Valorian astronomy that were better than the questions any diplomat had ever asked. She explained the structure of the conclave's council system, and he listened without interrupting, which she later learned was an effort for him. When he finally told her he wanted to spend more time with her, he said it plainly, without the formal declarations Valorian custom required, and she had stood there for a long moment trying to figure out if she was offended. She was not offended. She was, in some way she could not precisely name, relieved. 3 years later, they lived in a small house near the coast of what humans called the Pacific Northwest. Marcus worked remotely as a senior interpreter for the cooperative's communications division. Lyra had continued her cultural research, writing papers that her colleagues in the conclave described as unusually sympathetic toward human emotional behavior. She considered that a compliment, though she was fairly certain it was not intended as one. Life was quiet. Life was good. Marcus made coffee every morning and brought her a cup without asking, because he had learned exactly how she took it on their 4th day living together and never forgot. He fixed things around the house before she noticed they were broken. He left notes in odd places, short and strange and sometimes funny, and she had started keeping them in a small box on her desk without quite deciding to. She had never seen him truly angry. Frustrated, yes. He got frustrated with slow networks and bad drivers and politicians who said things they clearly did not believe. But that frustration moved through him quickly, like weather, and was gone. He did not hold on to things. He did not build quiet resentments the way some humans she had observed seemed to do. He addressed problems and moved forward, and if he could not address them, he let them go. Lyra had read the xenobiology reports on human emotional architecture. She knew, intellectually, that humans were capable of significant anger. Their history made that undeniable. But Marcus had always seemed to her like a man who had made a choice about who he wanted to be, and that choice did not include rage. She would later understand that she had only ever seen him when there was nothing truly worth being angry about. The message came on a Tuesday morning, while Marcus was in the kitchen and Lyra was reviewing a new cultural exchange proposal from the conclave's Eastern branch. It arrived through official cooperative channels, marked with the high-priority sigil that meant it had been routed past standard delays. She opened it, read it once, and then sat very still for a long moment. It was from the governing assembly of the Theric Dominion. The Theric were an old species, powerful and proud, with a long history of viewing newer members of the cooperative as temporary inconveniences rather than genuine partners. They had tolerated humanity's inclusion with visible reluctance. They had, it seemed, decided to stop tolerating it. The message was a formal notification. A Theric military vessel had intercepted a human exploration ship in the outer reach, far beyond established transit lanes. The human crew had been taken. The ship had been impounded. The notification stated, in the careful language of interstellar bureaucracy, that the crew would be held pending review of their unauthorized presence in Theric-adjacent space. Lyra read the crew manifest attached to the message. The fourth name on the list was Daniel Webb, age 26, junior navigator, Marcus's younger brother. She sat with that information for a moment. Then she got up and walked to the kitchen doorway. Marcus did not say anything for a long time after she finished. He stood at the kitchen counter with the coffee cup in his hand, and he was very still in a way that Lyra had never seen before. It was not the stillness of calm. She knew what his calm looked like. This was something else, something underneath calm, like the moment before a pressure system breaks and the sky changes color. She watched him set the cup down on the counter with extraordinary care, as if it were fragile, as if he needed his hands to be doing something deliberate so they would not do something else. Daniel, he said. Just the name. Nothing attached to it. Yes, Lyra said. He was listed as junior navigator aboard the Kestrel Point. The ship entered the outer transit corridor near Theric-designated space 6 days ago. The Dominion claims the vessel crossed into restricted territory. Does it? Marcus said. His voice was completely level. That should have been reassuring. It was not. The notification says the crew will be held pending jurisdictional review. That process can take, how long? She did not soften it. He would not want that. Months. Possibly longer. The Theric review process has no defined upper limit under cooperative law. There have been cases that lasted years. Something moved across his face, brief and controlled, gone almost before she saw it. He turned and walked to the window. Outside, the morning was still doing what mornings did. Birds, a gray sky, the distant sound of the water. Is he safe? Marcus asked. The notification does not address crew welfare directly. That is standard language for Theric formal communications. It means nothing specific about his condition, which means you don't know. Correct. He nodded slowly. Then he said, I need to make some calls. Lyra expected the calls to be to lawyers, or to the Human Diplomatic Office, or perhaps to his parents, who would need to be told. She understood those calls. She knew how to help with those calls. She had contacts in the cooperative's legal division. She had filed formal protest documents before on behalf of the mission. She was already composing the opening language in her mind. Marcus's first call was not to a lawyer. He called a man named Reyes, who Lyra had met once at a gathering and who had described himself as a retired logistics coordinator. She had thought, at the time, that he seemed overqualified for that description. Now, listening to half of the conversation from the hallway, she thought she had been right. The call was short. It was also almost entirely in a kind of shorthand she did not fully recognize, references to numbers and routes, and something called a window that clearly did not mean an opening in a wall. When Marcus hung up, he was already moving toward his office. Marcus, she said, what are you doing? Getting Daniel back. The proper process would be to file a formal protest through the cooperative's mediation office. I can begin drafting the documentation. Given the Theric's history with procedural delays, we might also consider engaging an independent arbitration panel, which would Lyra. He stopped walking and turned to look at her. His face was calm again, but it was a different kind of calm now. Focused, like something that had found its direction and was moving toward it. I know you know how to work the system. I love that about you. I'm asking you to trust that I know something about what happens when the system isn't fast enough. She studied him. 3 years of learning his expressions, his silences, the small shifts that meant he was holding something back. You've done this before, she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Before I was a translator. Before we met. She had known, in the vague way one knows things without examining them closely, that Marcus had a life before the cooperative. He rarely talked about it. She had not pushed, because she came from a culture that considered unprompted personal disclosure somewhat gauche, and because she had thought, in the comfortable way of happy people, that it didn't particularly matter. She was revising that assessment. What exactly did you do before you were a translator? She asked. He gave her a small, honest smile that had something tired in it, something old. I found people who didn't want to be found, and I returned things that had been taken. Over the next 6 hours, She watched her husband transform to IT was not dramatic. He did not become a different person. He was still Marcus, still the man who made her coffee and left her notes and laughed too loudly. But underneath all of that, something that had been sleeping very quietly for a long time was waking up. And as it woke, she began to understand that she had been looking at one layer of him for 3 years without ever seeing what was below it. He made 6 more calls. He sent messages in at least 4 languages, 2 of which she didn't recognize. He pulled files from encrypted storage on his personal system, files with designations she could not parse. He ate the rest of his breakfast standing up, methodically, without tasting it. And he did not HFY mid-morning. A dossier had taken shape on his screen. She read pieces of it over his shoulder. Ship manifests. Theric military protocols. Transit lane records going back 11 years. Names and associated contact methods for people who worked in the outer systems, people who moved things and knew things and existed in the spaces between official channels. You maintained this, she said slowly. All of this, while working for the cooperative, while we were married. Old habits, he said. I never expected to need it again. I'm glad I kept it. She was quiet for a moment. How many people have you done this for before? He looked at her. Enough to know what I'm doing. Marcus, how many? He turned back to the screen. 17 extraction operations over 4 years. Before I left that work. Before I decided I wanted something quieter. A pause. Before I met you. Lyra sat down in the chair beside his desk. She looked at the dossier, at the years of quietly maintained connections, at the shape of a life she had not known existed running parallel to the one she shared with him. She had married a gentleman. She was beginning to understand that his gentleness had never been the absence of something harder. It had always been a choice, a daily, deliberate choice, and now something had given him a reason to stop choosing it. Tell me what you need, she said. He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, something that recognized her, that had always recognized her better than anyone ever had. I need you to use every official channel you have, he said. File the protests. Engage the arbitration. Make noise through proper procedures. Make the Theric think that's the only thing happening. She understood. And while they're watching the official channels, I'll be doing something else entirely. Outside, the gray sky had deepened. Somewhere in the outer reach, past the transit lanes and the diplomatic borders and the careful architecture of interstellar law, a young man named Daniel Webb was sitting in a Theric holding facility, probably frightened, probably not fully understanding what had happened to him. His brother understood. And his brother was coming. The stars, Lyra thought, had no idea what was moving toward them. The Theric Dominion had existed for 600 years. They had absorbed 4 smaller civilizations during their expansion period, not through war in the conventional sense, but through a slow process of economic strangulation and strategic inconvenience that left smaller species with no viable options. They were patient in the way that very large, very old things were patient. They had watched species come and go. They had survived 3 major interstellar conflicts without ever losing a significant engagement. They had, in all their centuries, never been surprised. They were about to be. Marcus left Earth on a cargo hauler registered to a shipping concern that Lyra later verified had not technically existed for 7 years. It had a name, a registration number, a complete transport history, and a manifest that listed him as a contract freight specialist. None of it would survive serious scrutiny. All of it would survive casual scrutiny, which was the point. He called her from the hauler, 2 days out from Earth. The connection was routed through 3 relay stations and came through slightly delayed, his voice traveling impossible distances to reach her. The Theric have responded to the formal protest, she told him. She was in her office at the mission, surrounded by documents. They acknowledged receipt and have assigned a review panel. The panel's first scheduled meeting is in 9 weeks. 9 weeks, he said, not angry, noting it. I have also contacted the Independent Arbitration Council. They have placed the matter on their active docket. This is faster than usual. I may have implied that the Cooperative Senior Council was personally engaged in this case. A brief pause. Are they? They are now. She had spent 2 days making that true. She had called in favors she had been saving for years. She had been precise and relentless and had not stopped until the case had enough official weight that the Theric would feel compelled to perform the appearance of proper process. The Dominion's ambassador has requested a preliminary meeting. I have scheduled it for next week. I will be personally attending. You didn't have to do that. I am your wife, she said. And Daniel is family. Of course I did. She said it plainly, the way he said things, without the formal Valorian qualifiers she would normally reach for. It felt right. How are you? Moving, he said. I made contact with someone in the outer relay systems. She has access to etheric detention records. We know which facility Daniel is being held in. We know his current condition. Lyra felt something release in her chest that she hadn't realized she'd been holding. He is well. He's scared and he doesn't understand what's happening, and he keeps asking when someone's coming to get him. A pause. Someone's coming to get him. The facility was called Processing Hold 7, a name that told you everything about how the Theric viewed the people inside it. It was located on a station orbiting a dead moon in the outer reach, far enough from major transit lanes that it received minimal oversight from cooperative monitoring systems. The Theric used it for what they called administrative detentions, which was their term for holding people they wanted to hold without the inconvenience of formal charges. Marcus did not go directly to the facility. He spent 4 days in the outer relay systems, moving through a network of stations and waypoints that existed in the spaces where official mapping grew sparse. He met people. He exchanged things. He asked questions and listened to answers with the careful attention he gave to everything. The same quality of listening that had made Lyra trust him before she fully meant to. Lyra tracked what she could from Earth, piecing together his movements from the fragments he shared with her and the things she was able to infer. She was good at inference. 3 years of studying human behavior had made her better. 3 years of studying Marcus specifically had made her exceptional. She also attended the preliminary meeting with the Theric ambassador. Ambassador Velthraken was a tall being with the characteristic gray-plated features of the Dominion's ruling caste, and the particular quality of stillness that suggested complete confidence in one's own importance. He received her in the Dominion's mission hall, which was decorated in the heavy geometric style that Theric architecture favored, all angles and weight. He did not offer refreshment. He did not apologize for her wait, though she had been left in an anteroom for 40 minutes. He addressed her by her title and nothing else. Lyra was not offended. She was collecting information. The matter of the Kestrel Point, he said, is under active review by the Dominion's Jurisdictional Council. The process will proceed according to Dominion procedure. External pressure on this matter will not accelerate the timeline. I am not here to apply pressure, Lyra said. I am here to understand the Dominion's position and to ensure that the cooperative's interest in crew welfare is formally registered. Registered. He said the word as if it had a smell he did not enjoy. Yes. She held his gaze with the calm that came from having grown up in a civilization that had been practicing measured stillness for 1,000 years. Registered, documented, and associated with the names of the specific council members overseeing this review. For historical record, something shifted in his stillness. Just slightly, she continued. The Independent Arbitration Council has also registered its interest, as has, I understand, the Office of the Cooperative Senior Mediator, who has personally requested weekly status updates on crew welfare conditions. She paused. Weekly updates. The ambassador was quiet for a moment. The crew are in adequate condition. I am pleased to hear it. I will pass that information to the senior mediator's office. She stood, smoothly, before he could dismiss her. I expect we will speak again soon, Ambassador. The cooperative values its relationships with all member civilizations, including those with historically complex records. She left him sitting with the very precise implication she had placed in that last sentence. Back at the mission, she received a message from Marcus. For words that I'm close. Stay ready. She looked at those 4 words for a long moment. Then she opened a new document and began drafting a press release, because she understood what ready meant, and she intended to be at 400 light-years away, in the quiet dark between dead stars. A man who had spent years choosing gentleness was choosing something else now, and choosing it with the same absolute, deliberate commitment he brought to everything. The Theric had held people before. They had never had someone come for those people like this. They did not know yet what was coming. But in Processing Hold 7, a young navigator named Daniel Webb had noticed something strange 3 days running. The guards had started checking their logs more carefully. The monitoring systems had developed small, intermittent glitches. Nothing serious. Nothing anyone could point to directly. Just small things going slightly wrong that he did not know why. He did not know his brother. He did not know the shape of what was being built around him, carefully and quietly, piece by piece. But somewhere in him, in the place where hope lives when everything else has gotten very dark, something had started to feel different, like something was coming. The extraction of the Kestrel Point crew from processing hold 7 took 11 minutes. That was how long it took from the moment Marcus activated the plan to the moment the last crew member was through the secondary airlock of the waiting transport. 11 minutes, for something that had taken 12 days to build. 12 days of quiet, patient, invisible work, moving pieces into position the way his wife moved words through a diplomatic document. Each one placed with care, each one doing exactly what it needed to do, and nothing more. The Theric never saw him. That was not an accident. It was the whole point. The glitches in the monitoring system had been introduced slowly, over days, too gradual to trigger automated alerts. The guard rotation had been shifted by 6 minutes through a falsified maintenance order submitted by someone who had been owed a significant favor for a long time. The transport had been positioned in the station's sensor shadow, which existed because someone had quietly adjusted the station's own external array calibration 4 days earlier. Marcus had not done all of this alone. He had never done anything alone. That was something people who feared him, and there were people who feared him, he knew, from those other years, had never quite understood. They thought he was dangerous because of what he could do individually. They were wrong. He was dangerous because of what he could make possible, because of the network of trust he had built and maintained and never abused, because people who worked in the hard edges of the outer systems had long memories and kept careful track of who had kept their word. He had always kept his word. Daniel Webb was the last one through the airlock. He was thinner than his pictures, pale with station light, and his eyes had the wide, slightly unfocused quality of someone who had spent too many days not knowing what was going to happen to them. He looked at Marcus for a long moment. This stranger who had appeared from nowhere and moved through the facility like a man who knew exactly where every wall was going to be before he reached it. "You're Marcus," Daniel said. Not a question. He had seen photographs. "Yeah," Marcus said. "Come on. We need to move." They were 3 transit jumps away from Theric space before Daniel stopped shaking. By then Marcus had fed him, found him a blanket, and sat with him in the small crew area of the transport while the others slept. He did not fill the silence with reassurances. He just sat, present, the way he was always present with people when they needed it, and let Daniel come back to himself at his own pace. "How did you?" Daniel started, and then stopped. "Tried again. Lyra. She's the one who," she held the door open, Marcus said, "made enough official noise that the Theric were watching the front while I came through the back. She was good at it." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "She's actually terrifying, you know." In the meeting she had with their ambassador, it was all over the cooperative feeds. She just dismantled him, politely, in front of witnesses. People are calling it the Velen precedent now. Something about the way she framed the documentation apparently closed a loophole the Theric have been using for decades. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, and it was the real one, the one Lyra had first seen at a diplomatic gathering over a piece of bread and had never quite forgotten. "That's my wife," he said. The story, when it reached the wider networks of the Interstellar Cooperative, was told in pieces because no one had the complete picture and several of the people who did had reasons to stay quiet. What emerged was fragmentary and somewhat confused, which suited several parties very well. What was clear, 17 crew members from the human exploration vessel Kestrel Point had been released from Theric detention. The release had occurred simultaneously with a significant diplomatic incident in which the Valorian attaché Lyra Velen had presented documentation to the Cooperative's Arbitration Council that exposed the Theric Dominion's administrative detention policies as a systematic violation of 4 separate cooperative accords. The documentation was thorough, precise, and had clearly been assembled over a period of time by someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Also clear, the Theric had been furious. They had lodged formal protests with the cooperative, demanded an investigation into the unauthorized entry of their detention facility, and made several statements about human disregard for interstellar protocol that were noted, filed, and largely ignored by a cooperative that was now very interested in the content of Lyra's documentation. What was not clear, officially, was how exactly the crew had gotten out. The Therix account described a sophisticated operation carried out by an unknown number of operatives with apparently detailed knowledge of the facility's systems. The cooperative's official response expressed appropriate concern and promised a full review. The full review quietly went nowhere. In certain outer system circles, where people moved things and knew things, the story was told differently. A name came up, occasionally, in conversations held in transit lounges and cargo holds and the quiet spaces between official routes. Not always the same name. Sometimes it was a description. Sometimes it was just a reference, understood by the people in the conversation and no one else. The man who came back for his family. Lyra read the reports in her office at the mission, with a cup of coffee that Marcus had made before his transit home and left on her desk with a note that said, simply, "Thank you for holding the door." She had added it to the box. She thought about what she had believed 3 years ago, when she had first come to Earth as a junior cultural attaché who found humans puzzling. She had thought their emotions were a weakness. She had thought their unpredictability made them difficult to work with. She had thought gentleness in a person was simply the absence of threat. She understood now that she had been looking at a river and seeing only the surface. Marcus was gentle because he chose to be, every day, with the same intention and care he brought to everything else. But underneath that choice was something that had no real Valorian equivalent, something she had been trying to name for 3 years and had only now found the right word for. Devotion, not the careful, measured kind her culture practiced. The human kind, the kind that had no off switch, that did not calculate costs before it moved, that went into the dark between stars with 11 minutes of plan and 12 days of preparation and absolute faith in the people who had agreed to be part of it. The kind that shook things. When Marcus arrived home 2 days later, she was at the door before he reached it. He was travel-worn and tired and carrying nothing, because he had gone out with a ghost identity and come back as himself. He looked at her for a moment. "Hi," he said. "Hello," she said. She let him in. She made dinner. They sat at the table in their small house near the Pacific coast, and outside the window the water moved the way it always did, quiet and enormous and indifferent to the distances that had just been crossed. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you," he said eventually. "About before. What I used to do. You told me when it mattered," she said. He looked at her across the table, and she looked back at him, and between them was 3 years of coffee and notes and bread at diplomatic functions, and 11 minutes of something that had moved through the outer reach like weather, like a pressure system breaking, like the kind of force that is quiet for a very long time before it is suddenly not quiet at all. "The Theric ambassador sent a formal communication," she said. "He wanted me to convey that the Dominion considers the matter closed and has no interest in further engagement with the parties involved." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That's diplomatic language for please don't do that again." "Yes," she said. "I believe it is." She reached across the table and took his hand, the way he had always taken hers, without asking, because she had learned that some things did not require formal declarations. Outside, the stars were doing what they always did, burning at unimaginable distances, enormous and ancient, and largely unconcerned with the small warm creatures living underneath them. But somewhere in the outer reach, in the conversations held in the spaces between official maps, a story was settling into the kind of shape that stories take when they are going to last a long time. The story of a man who had chosen peace and kept that choice until peace was no longer an option. The story of a woman who had held every official door open and made every proper noise, and had also quietly assembled the evidence that dismantled a 600-year-old policy while no one was watching. The stars had been there for billions of years. They had never seen anything quite like this. They would not forget it.